The lights blaze across the studio, cameras rolling, the air thick with tension. Piers Morgan leans forward in his chair, the smirk already spreading across his face, like he's been waiting for this moment. His voice slices through Jasmine Crockett's sentence, dripping with derision. "Even listening to yourself?" he sneers, eyebrows arched as if he's already claimed victory. The audience shifts, some laughing nervously, others wincing at the blatant disrespect. It's the classic Piers maneuver: interrupt, belittle, dominate. For a split second, the world seems to freeze. Crockett pauses, her eyes narrowing just enough to register the insult without giving him the satisfaction of a flinch. Every viewer watching live feels the sting, especially those who've lived that exact dismissal in classrooms, workplaces. In boardrooms, the voice that tells you your perspective doesn't matter. The smirk on Piers' face widens, convinced he's landed the knockout blow. But Jasmine Crockett is not the type to crumble. She breathes in, her shoulders straightening, as though she's drawing power from every person who has ever been silenced. The silence stretches just long enough for viewers to lean in, wondering if she'll back down. And then, with a calm so sharp it cuts through the studio heat, she begins to speak. Her words don't rush. They land, one after another, steady, deliberate, laced with the weight of truth. The smirk falters. The confidence in Piers' eyes flickers as the balance of power in the room begins to shift. Each syllable reminds the audience, this is not a woman to be toyed with. And just when it seems like she's reached her peak, Crockett delivers the line that slices through the noise, the kind of line that leaves even a professional provocateur grasping for words. The cameras catch it all, the flicker in Piers' eyes, the stunned silence that follows. The rare moment when the king of interruptions has nothing left to say. What happened next left Piers Morgan stunned into silence. But this clash wasn't born in a vacuum. To truly grasp the force behind Crockett's words, why millions would soon be sharing the clip around the world, you need to understand the storm that led to this explosive encounter. Asterisk the stage was never neutral. Piers Morgan's show had long been branded as a battlefield where he thrived on cutting people off, cornering them with loaded questions, and turning serious debates into viral spectacles. Millions tuned in, not just in America, but across the globe, to witness these high-drama confrontations. His reputation as the loud interrogator, the man who could browbeat almost anyone into submission, was part of the draw. For him, every exchange was an opportunity to prove his dominance. For his guests, it was often a trap. So why was Jasmine Crockett there? Because the debate at hand was more than a television stunt. It was a fight over the very soul of America, questions of justice, political identity, and who gets to define what American values really mean. Morgan had framed the discussion as if Crockett's views were extreme, out of step, or naive. But Crockett knew better. She carried with her not just personal conviction, but the voices of countless people who had been written off, dismissed, or excluded from that conversation. The tension was obvious from the moment she sat down. Piers leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes glinting with that practiced mix of arrogance and anticipation. He'd played this game before. Provoke, interrupt, escalate, and at first it seemed to be working. Every time Crockett tried to lay out her vision of justice, he swooped in with another interruption, another jab designed to throw her off balance. His smirk said it all. This was his arena, and he thought she was just another name to be steamrolled for ratings. But here's the thing about underdogs, especially those who carry themselves with unshakable dignity. They don't just survive pressure. They thrive in it. Crockett's calm gaze, her measured tone, the way she refused to raise her voice even as Morgan raised his, it was like watching a chess player, refused to be baited into a careless move. Viewers at home could feel it. She wasn't there to trade insults. Like she was there to expose something deeper, something bigger than the man smirking across from her. The stakes weren't just Crockett versus Piers. They were about whether truth could cut through spectacle, whether a voice of integrity could stand its ground against a machine built on noise. Millions of eyes were locked on the broadcast, watching to see whether Crockett would be yet another casualty of Morgan's interruptions, or whether she would turn the tables in a way no one expected. And just when it seemed Piers would bulldoze through yet another guest, steamrolling her arguments into sound bites for his highlight reel, something shifted. Crockett leaned in, her eyes fixed on him not with anger, but with the quiet authority of someone who knows she doesn't have to shout to be heard. The audience, both in studio and at home, felt the current change. Piers was still talking, still circling, but it was as though his words were bouncing off steel. To understand the storm that unfolded in that studio, you have to understand the man who sat across from Jasmine Crockett. Piers Morgan has built an empire not on quiet reflection, but on volume, confrontation, and a mastery of humiliation as entertainment. His persona is crafted for maximum spectacle. The raised eyebrow, the scoff, the perfectly timed interruption, designed not to illuminate, but to dominate. To him, debate is not about clarity, it's about conquest. For decades, Morgan has thrived on turning every guest into a character in his performance. Meghan Markle knows this all too well. When she dared to speak her truth about race, isolation, and mental health, Piers responded not with empathy, but with derision. He dismissed her experience on air, waved away her pain as exaggeration, and in doing so, revealed what so many critics had long suspected. His empathy ends where his ego begins. The backlash was seismic. His departure from Good Morning Britain became a global story, but to Piers, it was just another chapter in his mythology as the man who says what others are too afraid to. American politicians have found themselves in his crosshairs too. Senators, activists, presidential hopefuls each became fodder for his particular brand of ambush. He thrives on catching them mid-thought, chopping their sentences into fragments, then pouncing on the fragments as if they were confessions. The rhythm is always the same: cut, mock, repeat. To his supporters, this makes him bold, fearless, unfiltered. But to his critics, it is a performance of arrogance wrapped in the veneer of journalism. And then there are the celebrities, athletes, actors, musicians. Anyone who dares to step outside the box Piers has drawn for them is met with disdain. He relishes the opportunity to poke at insecurities, to turn vulnerability into ammunition. He thrives in moments when the camera lingers on a guest's discomfort, when the studio audience shifts uneasily in their seats, when the world watches someone stumble under his pressure. In those moments, he believes he is untouchable. But arrogance has its own weight, and over time, it begins to show. The louder Morgan mocks, the more fragile his image becomes. Every sneer, every dismissive laugh, every time he bulldozes a guest with his voice, it's meant to project strength.
Oh.
Yet it also betrays insecurity. Why interrupt so forcefully unless you fear what the other person might say? Why shout down every perspective unless silence might expose the weakness in your own argument? Piers has spent years sculpting himself into the archetypal villain of modern debate. He doesn't just spar. He belittles. Doesn't just question. He ridicules. He doesn't just push back. He smirks, as if to say, "How dare you even try?" In the arena of political theater, he is the loud general barking orders, convinced that sheer volume is a substitute for truth. And yet the pattern is always the same. The more he tries to humiliate others, the more he reveals his dependence on that very performance. Without the smirk, without the scoff, without the interruption, what remains? This is why Jasmine Crockett's presence on his show was so dangerous to him. She was not the type to shout over him, to get tangled in the noise, or to crumble under the weight of his tactics. Her calm was not weakness, it was defiance. And in that calm, she exposed the truth about Morgan's style. It only works when his opponents play along. When they mirror his energy, he wins. When they try to outshout him, he smirks and declares victory. But when someone refuses to be baited, when they stand firm and measured, his entire strategy begins to collapse. The irony is undeniable. Piers built his brand on the illusion of strength, yet the moment he faced true composure, that illusion wavered. He thrived on humiliation, but humiliation cuts both ways. Audiences have long noticed it. The way his interruptions grow sharper. When a guest refuses to falter, the way his smile tightens when his jabs fail to land. For all his bravado, Piers Morgan has never quite mastered how to handle dignity. And that was the battlefield Jasmine Crockett was walking into. This wasn't just a clash of ideas. It was a clash of identities. Piers, the self-styled gladiator of talk shows, armed with interruption and mockery. Crockett, the unyielding voice of calm courage, carrying with her the quiet power of those who are too often silenced. It was a collision waiting to happen, and when it did, it would reveal more than either side anticipated. Jasmine Crockett's rise was never the story of someone handed a stage. It was the story of someone who built her own microphone when the world refused to hand her one. Long before the studio lights of a primetime television debate, she was walking the cracked sidewalks of neighborhoods overlooked by the powerful, listening to people whose voices had been drowned out by indifference. Her roots were not in privilege, but in grit, the kind of grit born from watching injustice up close and refusing to look away. As a young attorney, Crockett faced a choice that would shape her path. She could pursue the kind of law that promised comfort corner offices and prestige, or she could stand where the heat was hottest, defending those who had no one else. She chose the latter. Time and again, she stood shoulder to shoulder with clients who couldn't afford high-powered defense, challenging systems designed to wear them down. She didn't just practice law. She fought it like a street battle. Armed with knowledge and fire, those early years gave her scars, but they also gave her conviction. Each time she faced dismissive judges, skeptical juries, or stacked odds, she learned to stand taller, not louder. She learned that real power wasn't in how many times you interrupted someone, but in how clearly you could strip arrogance down to its hollow core. That lesson would prove prophetic when she later crossed paths with a man like Piers Morgan. Her leap from courtroom to Congress wasn't an accident, it was a continuation of the same fight. In Washington, Crockett became known as a straight-shooting advocate, someone who didn't sugarcoat truths for comfort. She spoke out about civil rights, economic injustice, and the dangerous games of those who wielded power without accountability. Critics tried to label her as too outspoken, but those words never landed the way they intended. For her supporters, that outspokenness was proof she hadn't been tamed by the system. Yet Crockett's strength wasn't only in fiery speeches. It was in her preparation. She devoured data, studied history, and treated every policy debate as if it were a cross-examination. Colleagues often noted that behind her sharp one-liners was a library of evidence ready to be unleashed. She didn't bluff, she built. She knew that facts weren't just numbers on paper. They were shields for the vulnerable and weapons against the arrogant, but beyond the policies and positions. It was something deeper. Moral compass, shaped by lived experience. Crockett understood what it meant to come from a community that had been dismissed. She knew the weight of being underestimated. And instead of shrinking, she turned that underestimation into her sharpest weapon. Every sneer, every eye roll, every patronizing laugh she had encountered over the years had become part of her training. By the time she sat across from Piers Morgan, she was not just a congresswoman. She was a survivor of countless smaller battles that had prepared her. For this very stage, her supporters often said that Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak values, she was the embodiment of them. Where others built their image through branding, she built hers through action. When she said she cared about justice, it wasn't a campaign slogan. It was the echo of long nights working pro bono cases. When she spoke about dignity, it wasn't theory, it was lived reality. It's forged in rooms where she had been underestimated, only to prove every doubter wrong. So when she walked onto Piers Morgan's set, the stage wasn't foreign to her. It was simply another arena. The millions of viewers watching might have seen an underdog facing a notorious interrogator, but those who knew her history understood the truth. Crockett had faced louder voices, harsher rooms, and higher stakes. And each time she hadn't just survived, she had come out stronger. This wasn't just a debate. It was the collision of two archetypes. The showman who mistook volume for power. The leader who knew that true strength comes from clarity, courage, and conviction. Crockett carried into that studio not just her arguments, but her story, a story of resilience that no smirk could erase. And soon, those values, sharpened by years of battle, would become her sharpest weapon against Morgan. The opening exchanges between Jasmine Crockett and Piers Morgan were measured, almost deceptively civil. But it didn't take long for the tension to surface like dry kindling, waiting for a single spark. Piers leaned forward in his chair, eyebrows arched, voice swelling with the bravado of a man accustomed to controlling the stage. He cut across her mid-sentence, his interruptions, sharp and frequent, designed to rattle, to overwhelm, to make her words stumble. Each time Crockett began to lay out a point, Piers' voice rose, layered with sarcasm and disdain, as though volume itself could dismantle her logic. "You're dodging the real issue," he barked, hands slicing the air. "Answer the question directly, Congresswoman." It was a tactic he'd used countless times before. Prod, dominate. For many guests, it worked. They fumbled, raised their voices to compete, or collapsed under the weight of constant interruption. But Jasmine Crockett was different. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back ever so slightly. Her body language calm, her voice steady, her eyes unshaken. Where Piers' energy grew erratic and jagged, hers remained composed, like a still lake refusing to ripple no matter how many stones were thrown at it. Every time he interrupted, she paused, not in defeat but in deliberate patience. She waited for him to burn through his outburst, and then, in measured tones, delivered her counterpoints with precision. The effect was electrifying. For viewers at home, the contrast was stark. On one side, a seasoned talk show host thrashing wildly to maintain dominance. On the other, a congresswoman projecting discipline, dignity, and unshakable conviction. Social media began to light up in real time. Clips of her calm demeanor against Piers' interruptions flooded Twitter feeds. Hashtags emerged within minutes. Commentators weighed in instantly. Crockett isn't just debating. She's dismantling him without even raising her voice. This is what grace under fire looks like. Each exchange turned into a duel of styles. Piers swinging with bluster and mockery. Crockett countering with clarity and control. When he accused her of ignoring facts, she cited them meticulously, each number and reference landing like a carefully aimed dart. When he mocked her positions as idealistic nonsense, she smiled faintly and reminded him of her lived experiences that gave weight to her words. The studio audience could feel the tension coiled tighter with every back and forth. Laughter rippled when Crockett, without raising her voice, pointed out, "It seems you're more interested in hearing yourself than in hearing the truth." The line sliced through the air like a blade, and for a split second, Piers was silent, his trademark smirk faltering before he rushed to cover the pause with yet another interruption. But the balance had shifted. The more he tried to bulldoze, the more it backfired. His frustration became visible, his jaw tightening, his words rushing faster, his interruptions more desperate. Meanwhile, Crockett's calm only amplified the spectacle. She wasn't just holding her ground, she was making him look unhinged by comparison. Viewers could sense it. Debate was tilting. The tempo of the moment was cinematic. Cameras caught close-ups of Piers' reddening face, contrasted with Crockett's serene expression. Online, millions shared memes of the duel in real-time. Piers as the shouting storm, Crockett as the unshakable mountain. And then, just when it seemed like the night was set in its rhythm, chaos versus composure, Crockett leaned in, ready to deliver a line that would change everything. The air grew thick with anticipation. The audience in the studio shifted forward in their seats. Social media users typed furiously, waiting for the next viral moment, because what Jasmine Crockett was about to say would flip the entire debate upside down. The tension had been simmering for nearly 20 minutes. Piers Morgan had interrupted, provoked, and tried to bulldoze his way through the debate. But Jasmine Crockett had refused to take the bait, or stayed calm, unshaken, her presence commanding in its restraint. And then came the moment. The cameras caught it perfectly. Crockett, leaning in ever so slightly, eyes locked on Piers with a steady intensity. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match his volume. Instead, she lowered it, forcing everyone in the studio and millions watching at home to lean forward. "You want to talk about dodging questions?" she said, her words deliberate, each syllable sharp as a blade. She paused, letting the silence hang. You've dodged accountability your entire career. The studio fell still. Piers' face twitched, the smug smirk faltering just enough for the audience to notice. The control he had wielded seconds earlier seemed to slip like sand through his fingers. Crockett didn't rush. She let the silence do half the work. You asked me about responsibility, she continued, her tone razor-sharp yet calm. But let's be clear. Responsibility is not about who shouts the loudest. It's about standing on facts. It's about truth. And truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. The camera cut to Piers. His expression shifted again, like brows tightening. Lips pursed, as though scrambling for a comeback, but finding none that wouldn't sound defensive. Crockett pressed on. Every time you interrupt me, every time you try to belittle what I'm saying, you're not exposing weakness in my argument. You're exposing weakness in yours. Gasps from the audience. Piers, visibly unsettled, tried to laugh it off. His voice rose, overlapping hers once again. Oh, come on, Congresswoman. Don't play the victim. But Crockett cut through his words without ever raising her tone. I'm not the victim. Here, Mr. Morgan, she said, eyes unwavering. I'm the one holding you accountable. The audience erupted, applause, cheers, even a few standing claps from the back rows. The live broadcast captured it all. The crowd energized, the host shaken, Crockett standing firm like an anchor in a storm. The camera zoomed in on Piers' face, mugness replaced with a tight-lipped grimace, his eyes darting as though looking for a foothold that no longer existed. Crockett, meanwhile, was methodical. She took every point he had thrown at her earlier, the accusations, the dismissals, the mocking, and dismantled them one by one. He said her views were idealistic nonsense. She countered with hard data, quoting recent studies and statistics. Her delivery crisp. He accused her of being soft on accountability. She turned it back on him, pointing to his own track record of controversies and contradictions, at each example cutting deeper. And she did it all with an almost surgical calm, never stumbling. Her pauses perfectly timed to make the weight of her words sink in. The cameras fed this drama directly into living rooms worldwide, and the editing team knew exactly where to focus. Close-ups of Crockett's unwavering poise, cutaways to Piers, increasingly rattled expressions, wide shots of the audience gasping, clapping, even whispering to each other. Social media was ablaze. Hashtag surged to the top within minutes. Hashtag Crockett mic drop. Hashtag Piers shut down. Hashtag .com over chaos. One viral tweet flashed on screen. At livestream legend, Piers Morgan came for a fight. Jasmine Crockett came with facts, patience, and a mic drop moment. Guess who's winning? Another at Daily Debates. This is what happens when arrogance meets unshakable truth. Crockett just turned the tables. Back on stage, the climax unfolded. Piers, visibly flustered, leaned in as though trying to reclaim control with sheer force. You think you've proven something here tonight? He snapped. Crockett's reply was devastating in its simplicity. I don't need to prove anything, Mr. Morgan. The truth proves itself. Silence. The line hung in the air like a final verdict. The audience broke into thunderous applause, the kind that drowns out everything else. The camera captured Piers' stunned, face eyes blinking, jaw tight, words caught in his throat, and then Crockett leaned back in her chair, serene as ever, a faint smile touching her lips. It wasn't gloating, it wasn't boastful. It was the look of someone who knew she had said exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more. The applause rolled on. Piers, for once, had no comeback. His trademark wit, his arsenal of interruptions, his booming voice all rendered useless in the face of Crockett's calm, calculated dismantling. The broadcast ended on that note, not with Piers having the last word, but with the image of Jasmine Crockett, composed and resolute, having flipped the entire debate upside down. Narrator's voice closed it out like a cinematic epilogue. This wasn't just a rebuttal. It was proof that truth can silence even the loudest laugh. The broadcast cut to commercial, but the real fireworks had only just begun. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett's calm yet devastating dismantling of Piers Morgan was flooding social media timelines across the globe. Twitter lit up with hashtags, hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag Piers shut down. And the most poetic of them, all hashtag truth, silences arrogance. Supporters rushed in first. Finally, someone stood up to him without stooping to his level, one user wrote, the post racking up tens of thousands of retweets. Another said, this wasn't just a debate, it was a masterclass in dignity under fire. Memes spread like wildfire, side by side, screenshots of Morgan's smug smirk dissolving into a stunned glare, overlaid with captions like when the roast turns into your own funeral. But the shockwaves weren't confined to Twitter. On TikTok, clips of Crockett's precise counterattack were remixed with triumphant music, everything from Beyoncé anthems to cinematic orchestra swells. Instagram Reels flooded feeds with captions like, she didn't raise her voice, she raised the bar. Even Morgan's critics, who had long grown weary of his bombastic style, admitted they had never seen him this exposed. Even Morgan had no comeback, one viral tweet declared, garnering hundreds of thousands of likes. His trademark moved the bulldoze, the interruption, the laugh had failed, and in that failure, viewers saw something rare, the fall of a self-proclaimed giant. But it wasn't just the fans and critics online. Commentators and political voices weighed in. A late-night host quipped, Piers Morgan tried to do what Piers Morgan always does, talk over his guest. But Crockett didn't just talk back. She sent him into witness protection, as the audience roared, clips of the joke joining the viral flood. Other politicians, particularly women of color, hailed Crockett's composure. One tweeted, what Jasmine did tonight was bigger than TV. It was a statement. Dignity is strength. The sentiment echoed across activist communities who saw in Crockett's moment not just a clapback, but a blueprint for confronting arrogance with grace. The ripple effect was undeniable. Newspapers ran headlines, Crockett leaves Morgan speechless. Truth versus bluster, Crockett wins, and the day the bully got schooled. Think pieces filled op-ed pages, dissecting the confrontation, not as spectacle, but as symbolism. A clash between outdated arrogance and a new generation of leaders who refused to bow. For Crockett, transformation was immediate. She had walked onto the set as another guest in Piers Morgan's long line of sparring partners. But by the next morning, she was a national headline, her name surging in Google searches, her words replayed on podcasts, news panels, and classroom discussions alike. Yet in the midst of the applause, Crockett herself chose restraint. She didn't gloat. She didn't spike the football. Instead, she issued a brief statement that reframed the entire frenzy. It was never about winning a debate. It was about showing that truth and dignity matter even when they're mocked. And in that moment, she flipped the script again. This wasn't just about a viral exchange or a silenced pundit. It was about something deeper. The idea that leadership isn't defined by the loudest voice, but by the strongest values. The suspense only grew. Commentators were still asking, was this a one-time viral spark, or the beginning of something bigger? Was Crockett's dismantling of Morgan merely a media moment, or a cultural shift? As the dust settled and the memes burned through every social platform, Jasmine Crockett finally took the stage to clarify what had really happened. For many, it had looked like a televised knockout. Morgan, the brash provocateur, floored by a guest he underestimated. But Crockett was quick to reject the framing. It was never about humiliating anyone, she said softly, her voice steady but resolute. It was about truth. That distinction mattered. Because if this moment were remembered only as a clapback, only as another viral takedown, then it would join the long list of social media sensations, loud today, gone tomorrow. But Crockett's words elevated it into something more universal, something enduring. She made it clear this wasn't just a clash of personalities or a duel between egos. It was a lesson written live in front of millions. The lesson that dignity carries more weight than arrogance. You're in that courage, even when delivered calmly, cuts deeper than mockery. Audiences who replayed the exchange began to notice what they had missed the first time. It wasn't the volume of Crockett's rebuttal that shook Morgan, it was the precision. It wasn't anger that disarmed him, it was composure. Every pause, every carefully chosen word, landed with the gravity of truth itself. Crockett summed it up in a single line that echoed beyond the debate stage. Leadership isn't about intimidation. It's about integrity. It was a phrase that transformed what could have been just another skirmish in the endless culture wars into a moral North Star. Her reminder resonated because it cut through the noise of modern politics, where shouting often drowns out substance, and bullying is mistaken for strength. For viewers, the moment became deeply personal. They saw in Crockett's calm resistance a mirror of their own battles at work. At school, at home, where arrogance seeks to belittle, and dignity must stand its ground. Her response was more than a rebuttal to a TV host. It was a roadmap. For anyone facing the sneer of arrogance, hold steady, trust truth. Let integrity do the work, and so the emotional crescendo built. This was bigger than a TV debate. It was a reminder, calm truth can topple even the loudest arrogance. It wasn't just a statement, it was an anthem. People repeated it in classrooms, tweeted it with pride, stitched it onto TikToks, and quoted it in podcasts. For a fleeting moment, the nation felt unified by something rare, an affirmation that character matters more than cruelty, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and still wins. Crockett's reflection didn't just empower her audience. It reframed the nature of debate itself. She reminded the world that strength isn't measured in decibels, but in principles. That winning an argument isn't the goal, illuminating truth is. And so the viral moment became something bigger. A parable. A modern David and Goliath story, where the stone wasn't anger, but composure. Where the victory wasn't humiliation, but moral clarity. And so we return to the very heart of this story. The title promised us a moment where Jasmine Crockett flipped the trial, but what made it remarkable wasn't fury, or rage, or spectacle. What flipped the entire narrative was something far stronger, the quiet force of truth. In a world addicted to outrage, Crockett stood out by refusing to play the game. She didn't match arrogance with arrogance, nor mockery with mockery. Instead, she delivered what America is so desperately searching for right now: moral clarity. Her composure reminded us that leadership isn't measured by how loud you can shout, but by how firmly you can stand when tested. It's about grounding yourself in dignity, even when provoked. It's about fearlessness that doesn't bluster, but steadies. It's about choosing integrity every single time over intimidation. That's the kind of leadership America needs. That's the kind of voice that cuts through the chaos. And that's why Crockett's moment didn't just go viral. It resonated. Because deep down, all want to believe that truth still matters. So here's where you come in. If you believe in standing up to arrogance with dignity, if you believe courage should be calm, not cruel, if you believe integrity should never be optional, then subscribe. Share and let your voice be heard. This isn't just about one debate. It's about the culture we build, the leaders we uplift, and the truth we defend together. And as the story fades to black, one reminder echoes above the noise, because in the end, truth always speaks louder.